The glare of the city's opulent charity gala illuminated the relentless downpour, mirroring the storm brewing inside Elias. A single dad. He wrestled with the ghost of his late wife, Amanda, and the crushing medical debt left by her brutal illness, a debt ignored by the very pharmaceutical titan, Corbin Labs, whose CEO, Bellamy, now smiled from the podium. Elias clutched a worn teddy bear, Leo's sole link to his mother, its fragile stitching a stark reminder of their vulnerability. He had come not for vengeance, but for a voice, a final plea, unaware that this desperate act would unveil a corporate conspiracy threatening not just his family, but countless others. The gala glittered with an artificial warmth, hundreds of tiny lights reflecting off polished marble and designer gowns. Elias, a lab technician for Corbin Labs, felt an oppressive weight in his chest, a familiar pressure that had taken root 2 years ago when Amanda, his wife, had died. He stood near a grand archway, a silent sentinel in a borrowed suit that felt stiff and alien. His 8-year-old son, Leo, clutched a threadbare teddy bear named Barnaby, its single button eye gazing out at the dazzling crowd. Barnaby was Leo's lifeline, the last tangible piece of Amanda. Bellamy, the CEO of Corbin Labs, commanded the stage, his voice smooth and resonant as he spoke of philanthropy and innovation. Elias watched, a bitterness rising in his throat. Bellamy represented the very system that had failed Amanda, denying her the experimental treatment that might have saved her. The irony of Bellamy accepting an award for humanitarian efforts, while Amanda's ghost haunted Elias's every step, was a cruel twist in his inner jacket pocket, a sealed envelope pressed against Elias's skin, a handwritten plea for a posthumous review of Amanda's case, outlining inconsistencies he had found in discarded lab notes from the time. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort, a silent scream into the void. As Bellamy finished his speech, the crowd erupted in polite applause. Elias began to move, pushing through the throng, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He spotted a woman across the room, her elegant scent drifting faintly through the air. Leo, nestled against Elias's leg, suddenly stirred. "Daddy," he whispered, his voice small and wondering. "That lady smells like Mommy." Elias glanced at the woman, a stranger, and then back at Bellamy, whose smile seemed to mock him. He tightened his grip on the envelope, bracing himself for the impossible. 2 years ago. The sterile white walls of the hospital had been Amanda's final battleground, her rare autoimmune disease, a merciless thief of her vitality, had progressed rapidly. Elias remembered the stacks of medical bills, a growing monument to their desperation, each sheet of paper a fresh wound. Corbin Labs, under Bellamy's recently implemented cost-cutting directives, had denied Amanda access to an experimental treatment, citing insufficient data and high risk, despite promising early results in preliminary trials. Elias had fought, pleaded, but his words had bounced off a wall of corporate indifference. He recalled Amanda's fading smile, a heartbreaking image etched into his memory, and Leo's innocent confusion as his mother grew weaker, unable to understand why she couldn't play anymore. The crushing medical debt had become a constant companion, a heavy shroud. Elias remembered late nights poring over payment plans, the numbers blurring into an impossible maze. He worked extra shifts at Corbin Labs, his hands tracing the same equipment that had, in another universe, held the promise of Amanda's recovery. The guilt was a corrosive acid, eating away at his soul. He had been unable to save her, unable to protect his family from the unforgiving machinery of a system driven by profit. He often found Leo sitting alone, sketching the fantastical creatures that filled his solitary world, a poignant reminder of the void Amanda had left. Elias finally reached Bellamy, his breath catching in his throat. Bellamy's smile, perfected over years of public appearances, did not falter as Elias stood before him. "Mr. Bellamy," Elias began, his voice hoarse with suppressed emotion. He extended the envelope, his hand trembling slightly. "This is about Amanda Hayes, my late wife. She was denied access to treatment here, and I believe there were inconsistencies in her case files." Bellamy glanced at the envelope, his eyes dismissing it before his gaze even registered Elias's face. "I'm sure our medical review board handled her case with the utmost professionalism," Bellamy said, his voice clipped, already turning away. He signaled to Corbin, his head of security, who moved in swiftly. "Corbin, handle the disruption." Elias watched helplessly as the envelope slipped from his grasp, falling silently to the polished marble floor, swallowed by the folds of a tablecloth. Outside the gala, the blizzard raged, a tempest of blinding snow and howling wind. Elias, reeling from Bellamy's callous dismissal, found himself pulled into another unfolding crisis. A car, battered and abandoned, sat half-submerged in a snowdrift. Beside it, huddled against the guardrail, a woman, her face etched with exhaustion, shielded two small children. Callista, though Elias did not know her name yet, looked utterly defeated. Her children, a little girl and a younger boy, coughed weakly, their small bodies shivering uncontrollably. Their car's hazard lights were long dead, swallowed by the snow. Elias felt a chilling familiarity, the fear for innocent lives, the helplessness against an indifferent force. He hesitated, the warmth of his SUV feeling like a guilty indulgence. The memory of Amanda's fragile vulnerability, her struggle against an illness no one could stop, made him afraid to get involved, to witness another tragedy. He had enough ghosts. But then, Leo, sensing the gravity of the scene, spoke from the back seat. "Daddy." They look cold, like Mommy used to get. The simple, innocent observation cut through Elias's reluctance. It was a mirror of his own past, a direct appeal to the compassion he had almost buried under layers of grief. Duty, not a choice, propelled him. He pulled his SUV onto the shoulder, the powerful engine a low growl against the storm's shriek. He cut the engine, plunging them into a shared bubble of quiet. The wind howled, and his own breathing seemed suddenly loud. He pushed open the heavy door, and the wind tore at him, stinging his face with ice crystals. He strode toward them, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. Callista flinched, pulling her children closer. A primal act of protection. "You need to get out of the storm," Elias called, his voice rough against the wind. "My car is warm. I can take you somewhere safe." Callista stared at him, her mind perhaps too frozen to process the offer. But the little girl, Maya, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was permission. It was trust. Callista finally moved, a slow, stiff unfolding of limbs. Elias caught her before she fell, his hands closing around her thin arms. She was lighter than he expected, fragile. He guided her and the children to the SUV. Maya and Noah scrambled in without hesitation, drawn to the heat like moths to a flame. Callista hesitated, her eyes meeting Elias's, gratitude mixed with profound weariness. He gave her a small nod of encouragement, and she slid in beside her children. He shut the door, the sound a solid, reassuring thud against the storm. The journey to his home, nestled deep in the wooded hills outside the city, was a slow crawl through the blizzard. The estate, a sprawling structure of dark wood, stone, and vast panes of glass, had been a fortress of modern architecture, but to Elias, it was just a collection of empty rooms, a place where memories echoed too loudly. Now, with the unexpected presence of Callista, Maya, and Noah, the isolation felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. He parked in the garage, the warmth a welcome relief. "We're here," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "You're safe now." Callista looked at the house, then back at him, a mixture of awe and disbelief in her eyes. He led them inside. The great room was cavernous, with a vaulted ceiling and a fireplace that took up an entire wall of stone. A flick of a switch brought the gas logs to life, bathing the room in warm, dancing light. He told them to sit by the fire. The children scurried toward the hearth, holding their hands out to the heat. Callista followed more slowly, sinking onto the edge of the large leather sofa. Elias went to the kitchen, heating soup and making grilled cheese sandwiches, the same simple meal he made for Leo most nights. He was acutely aware of the new presence in his house, the soft murmur of Callista's voice, the small cough from Noah. These were the sounds of life, sounds that had been largely absent from these walls for so long. He brought the food out on a tray. The children ate with a quiet, desperate hunger that twisted something in his chest. Callista took only a few bites, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of soup. "You and your children can stay in the guest wing," he said, breaking the silence. "There are beds, a bathroom. You can rest." She finally looked at him directly, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't have to," he replied. Her presence, her vulnerability, had pulled him out of his own head, out of the monotonous loop of his grief. If only for a few hours. In a strange way, she had rescued him as much as he had rescued her. He showed them to the guest rooms, clean, comfortable, and utterly impersonal. He found extra blankets and pillows, then hesitated. They needed a change of clothes. Theirs were damp and thin. There was only one other option. He walked down the hall to a closed door he had not opened in over a year. He turned the knob. The air inside was still and cool, carrying the faint, sweet scent of lavender and vanilla, Amanda's scent. Her closet was just as she had left it. He stood there for a long moment, the grief a physical weight. He pulled out a soft cashmere sweater, cream-colored, and a pair of gray sweatpants. Simple, comfortable things Amanda had loved to wear. He held them, the fabric soft against his skin. He did not think about the perfume that lingered in the fibers. He was just a man trying to solve a practical problem. He also retrieved some of Leo's old pajamas, picture books, and stuffed animals. On impulse, he added a simple, elegant tortoise-shell hair clip that Amanda had bought but never worn. He left the folded clothes on a chair and closed the door quietly, leaving them to their privacy. The next morning, the blizzard had not relented. Elias, accustomed to early mornings, made coffee as he stood by the windows in the great room. Callista appeared, dressed in Amanda's sweater and sweatpants, her hair pulled back with the tortoise-shell clip. Some of the exhaustion had receded from her eyes, replaced by a quiet watchfulness. "Good morning," she said, her voice still a little rough. "The children are still sleeping." "It's fine," he replied. "Let them rest." He offered her a mug of coffee. They stood in silence, watching the storm. It was then that Leo padded into the room in his superhero pajamas, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He stopped short when he saw Callista. Leo had been a shy, withdrawn child since his mother's death, wary of new people, especially women. Elias tensed, expecting him to retreat. But Leo did something unexpected. He walked slowly toward Callista, his eyes fixed on the sweater. He stopped a few inches from her, tilted his head, and sniffed the air. He took another small step, his nose almost touching the soft cashmere. A look of profound confusion and recognition crossed his small face. He looked up at Callista, then over at Elias, his eyes wide with a startling revelation. "Daddy," he said, his voice a small, wondrous whisper. "That lady, she smells like Mommy." The words struck Elias like a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs. He had been so focused on the practical act of finding clothes that he had completely forgotten. Amanda's signature perfume, a custom blend of lavender and vanilla that she had worn every day. The scent lingered on her clothes, in her closet, in her pillow. It was the scent of his life with her, the scent of his grief, and now it was clinging to this stranger in his house. Callista froze, her hand flying to her chest, her eyes wide with alarm and confusion. She looked down at the sweater as if it had betrayed her. Leo, oblivious to the emotional devastation he had just caused, simply reached out a small hand and touched the sleeve of the sweater. He stroked the soft fabric, a sad, gentle smile on his face. It was a gesture of pure, innocent longing. For a moment, the room was suspended in a fragile bubble of memory and pain. Elias could not breathe. He saw Amanda standing there wearing that same sweater, a smile on her face. He saw Leo as a toddler burying his face in her shoulder, breathing in that same scent. The past and the present collided with devastating force. Callista was the first to break the spell. She knelt down slowly so she was at eye level with Leo. "Your mommy must have smelled very nice," she said, her voice gentle and steady, betraying none of the turmoil Elias knew she must be feeling. Leo nodded, his eyes still fixed on the sweater. "She smelled like home," he said simply. The child's words were a dagger to Elias's heart. He turned away, unable to watch, and stared out the window at the relentless snow, his knuckles white as he gripped the back of a chair. He had invited these people into his home to save them from the storm. But in doing so, he had unleashed a tempest inside his own heart. Later that night, after the children were tucked into bed, the house fell into a profound silence. Callista found Elias in the great room, staring into the flames. He had been quiet and distant all day, his movements stiff, his words clipped. He was a fortress again, the walls of his grief rebuilt, thicker and higher than before. She sat in the armchair opposite him, a safe distance away, for a long time. Neither of them spoke. The air was thick with unspoken things. Finally, Callista broke the silence. "I'm sorry," she said softly, "about the sweater. I didn't know." Elias did not look at her. He just shook his head, his gaze still fixed on the fire. "It's not your fault," he said, his voice flat. "I shouldn't have given it to you. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't—" "Your wife," Callista began, then trailed off, unsure of how to continue. Something inside Elias snapped. The carefully constructed dam of his control, eroded by exhaustion and the emotional shock of the morning, finally broke. "Her name was Amanda," he said, the words torn from him. "She died 2 years ago. A rare autoimmune disease. Corbin Labs denied her an experimental treatment that showed promise. A night just like this one." He finally turned to look at her, and she saw the raw, unvarnished pain in his eyes. It was a pain she recognized. It was the same pain that lived inside her. He told her everything: the police officer at the door, the sterile white of the hospital, the deafening silence of the house. He confessed that he felt like he was living underwater, his actions driven by a sense of duty that felt more like a prison sentence. He was a ghost in his own life, haunting the rooms where he had once been happy. Callista listened without interrupting, her expression full of a deep, compassionate understanding, when he fell silent. She did not offer empty platitudes or condolences. She simply shared her own story. She told him about her husband, David, a kind and steady man who had been a soldier. She spoke of his last deployment, the pride and the fear that had been her constant companions. She described the day the two officers in dress uniform had come to her door, their presence a harbinger of a life irrevocably shattered. She told Elias about the cascade of misfortunes that followed the loss of his pension due to a bureaucratic error, a sudden illness that drained her savings and cost her her nursing job, the eventual eviction from their small apartment. She had been trying to get to a shelter in the next state where a distant cousin had offered a sliver of hope. She had been running on fumes and faith, and both had finally run out on that snowy mountain pass. As she spoke, Elias saw the full scope of her resilience. She had faced loss after loss, setback after setback. Yet, she had not broken. She had kept her children safe. She had kept moving forward. She had kept hope alive in the face of utter despair. They were two sides of the same coin. He had been frozen by his grief, trapped in the past. She had been propelled by hers, forced to fight for a future. They sat there, two strangers bound by a shared trauma, their stories laid bare in the warm, flickering light of the fire. The storm raged outside, but for the first time, a quiet calm began to settle within the walls of the house and within the battered chambers of their hearts. The next morning, Leo approached Callista again. He did not mention the sweater or his mother. Instead, he held out a piece of paper. It was a child's drawing rendered in bright, cheerful crayon. It depicted a large, boxy house with a smoking chimney. Inside the house were 5 stick figures, a tall man he recognized as Elias, a small boy with brown hair, and a woman with 2 smaller children. All 5 of them were holding hands. Outside the house, a furious storm was raging, represented by thick, angry blue and gray scribbles. But inside the house, the stick figures were smiling. Callista took the drawing from him, her fingers tracing the simple lines. "It's beautiful, Leo," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Leo pointed to the figure of her. "That's you," he said. "You're inside now. You're safe from the storm." Callista looked up at Elias, her eyes shining. The drawing was more than just a picture. It was a child's acceptance. It was a statement of fact. She was here. She was part of this picture, this sanctuary. It was a validation of her presence, a symbol that she was no longer just a stranger he had rescued, but someone who belonged within these walls. Elias felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so foreign he barely recognized it. It was hope. The blizzard continued for 3 more days, a relentless siege that cut them off from the rest of the world. The roads were impassable. The power flickered on and off, and the house on the hill became their entire universe, in this forced proximity. A new rhythm began to establish itself. Callista, unable to sit idly by as a guest, slowly began to fill the empty spaces of the house with life. She was not trying to replace what had been lost. She was simply trying to create a sense of normalcy for her children, and in doing so, she began to heal the house itself. She started in the kitchen, a vast, sterile space of stainless steel and marble that Elias had used only for the most basic of meals. She found the pantry stocked with staples he had ordered but never used. Soon the air, which had for so long carried only the faint, ghostly scent of Amanda's perfume, was filled with the warm, comforting aromas of baking bread, simmering soup, and roasting chicken. She taught the children how to knead dough, their small hands covered in flour, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. Elias would come home from his makeshift office in the study to find the kitchen transformed into a bustling, warm heart of the home. He found himself drawn to the activity, initially as a silent observer, then as a hesitant participant. He would lean against the counter, a mug of coffee in his hands, and watch Callista move with a quiet, confident grace. She organized the chaotic pantry, labeled jars, and created a sense of order that was both practical and calming. She was not just making food, she was creating a home. One afternoon, she coaxed him into helping her make cookies. He was clumsy at first, his large hands unused to such delicate work. But soon he found himself laughing along with the children as they decorated gingerbread men with lopsided smiles. It was the first time he had truly laughed in 2 years, and the sound surprised him. The children were the true catalysts, the architects of this new, fragile family unit. Leo, Maya, and Noah bonded with the effortless, immediate acceptance that is the sole province of the young. They saw no barriers of circumstance or grief. They simply saw new playmates. They built magnificent forts out of sofa cushions and blankets in the great room, their whispered secrets and giggles a constant, cheerful soundtrack. They held elaborate tea parties for their stuffed animals and staged epic battles with plastic dinosaurs on the plush carpets. One afternoon, the snow let up for a few hours, blanketing the world in a pristine, glittering layer of white. The children, desperate for fresh air, begged to go outside. Elias and Callista bundled them up in a hodgepodge of winter gear, and they all tumbled out into the snowy landscape. A chaotic, joyful snowball fight erupted. Elias found himself ambushed by his own son, a snowball hitting him square in the chest, the shock of the cold, followed by Leo's peal of delighted laughter, broke through another layer of his reserve. He scooped up a handful of snow and retaliated, and soon all 5 of them were engaged in a wild, breathless battle, their laughter rising up into the crisp winter air. In that moment, surrounded by the flying snow and the happy shrieks of the children, Elias felt a flicker of pure, uncomplicated joy. It was a spark in the darkness, a promise that life could be more than just an exercise in endurance. That evening, a small crisis occurred. Leo was carrying his most prized possession, a worn, well-loved teddy bear named Barnaby. It had been a gift from Amanda on his first birthday, and it was his constant companion, a tangible link to the mother he barely remembered. As he was running through the living room, he tripped and fell. The ancient seams of the old bear, strained by years of love, finally gave way. A long tear appeared down Barnaby's back, and a trickle of stuffing fell out onto the carpet. Leo's face crumpled, and he let out a heartbroken wail. He clutched the damaged bear to his chest, his small body shaking with sobs. Elias rushed to his side, his heart aching for his son. He took the bear and examined it. He was a man who could fix a failing company, a man who could analyze complex financial data, but he had no idea how to fix a simple stuffed animal. "It's okay. Leo," he said, his voice full of a confidence he did not feel. "We can fix him." Callista came over, drawn by Leo's cries. She knelt beside him and gently took the wounded bear from Elias's hands. She examined the tear with a practiced eye. "I can fix him. Leo," she said softly. "He just needs a little surgery." She went to the guest room and returned with a small sewing kit she had found in a drawer. She sat by the fire with Leo. "Maya, and Noah gathered around her like anxious family members in a hospital waiting room. With her steady, nimble fingers, the hands of a nurse who had stitched up countless wounds, she carefully sewed the seam back together. Her stitches were small, neat, and precise. She worked with a quiet focus, her expression calm and reassuring. She pushed the escaped stuffing back inside and closed the final gap, knotting the thread securely. She handed the repaired bear back to Leo. Barnaby was whole again. A faint, neat scar, the only evidence of his injury. Leo hugged the bear tightly, his tears subsiding. He looked up at Callista, his eyes full of awe and gratitude. He reached out and placed his small hand on her arm. "You fixed him," he whispered. Then, with the profound, simple wisdom of a child, he asked a question that resonated deep in Elias's soul. "Can you fix everything?" Callista smiled, a gentle, melancholy expression on her face. She smoothed Leo's hair back from his forehead. "No, sweetie," she said softly, "I can't fix everything, but I can fix the things that matter." Elias watched them, the firelight casting a warm glow on their faces, and he knew she was not just talking about the bear. She was mending the torn seams of their lives, one small, careful stitch at a time. As the days bled into a week, the accumulated stress and prolonged exposure to the cold finally caught up with Callista. One evening, as she was helping clear the dinner table, she swayed on her feet, her face suddenly pale. She put a hand to her forehead and murmured something about being dizzy before her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed onto the floor. Elias reacted instantly, his mind shifting into crisis mode. He scooped her up in his arms. She felt terrifyingly light, and he carried her to the guest room. A quick check confirmed his fears. Her skin was hot to the touch, her breathing shallow. She had a raging fever. The nurse in her had been so focused on caring for everyone else that she had ignored the signs of her own body failing. She was sick, vulnerable, and completely dependent on him. And in that moment, a cold, familiar dread washed over Elias. The image of Callista, pale and unconscious in the bed, blurred with the memory of Amanda in a hospital bed, her body wasting away from the swift, brutal illness, the helplessness, the terror of watching someone you care about fade before your eyes. It all came rushing back. His carefully rebuilt composure crumbled. The nascent warmth that had been growing in his heart was extinguished by the icy grip of fear. He sealed himself off. He became a machine of perfect, cold efficiency. He called his private doctor, who prescribed medication over the phone. He administered the medicine with clinical precision. He ensured she had water and broth. He took over all care for the 3 children, managing their meals, their games, their bedtime stories with a detached competence. He was the perfect caregiver. But he was no longer a partner. He avoided touching Callista unless absolutely necessary. He spoke to her in short, polite sentences, his voice devoid of warmth. When she was awake, he would inquire about her symptoms, but he would not meet her eyes. He was building a wall around his heart, brick by painful brick, because the thought of letting her in completely, only to lose her, was a torment he could not bear. He had survived one loss. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he would not survive another. The emotional distance was a palpable thing in the house. The children sensed it, their boisterous play becoming more subdued, their glances between the 2 adults filled with quiet confusion. The laughter died down. The house was silent and orderly once more, just as it had been before the storm. It was safe, and it was suffocating, after 2 days of rest and medication. Callista's fever broke. The strength slowly returned to her limbs. but the chill in the house remained. She could feel Elias's withdrawal like a physical barrier. He was polite, attentive, and 1,000,000 miles away. The connection they had forged by the fire, the easy camaraderie they had built with the children, had vanished. She knew what it was. She had seen it in the eyes of patients' families before. It was fear, the paralyzing fear of loss. That night, after the children were asleep, she found him in his study. The room was dark, save for the blue glow of his laptop screen. He was working, escaping into the familiar, predictable world of spreadsheets and contracts. She stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she walked in and quietly closed the door behind her. He looked up, his expression guarded. She did not sit down. She stood before his large mahogany desk, a fragile but determined figure in the dim light. "You're afraid," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact. Elias's jaw tightened. He looked away from her, back at the screen. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You're terrified. When I got sick, you looked at me and you saw her. You felt that same helplessness, that same fear. And so you shut down. You're pushing us away because you think it will hurt less if you have to say goodbye." Her words hit their mark. A shudder went through him. He closed the laptop, the sudden darkness making the room feel more intimate, more intense. He still would not look at her. "I can't do it again." "Callista," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can't watch someone I care about disappear. I can't put my son through that again. I can't put myself through it." She walked around the desk until she was standing beside his chair. She placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched at her touch, but did not pull away. "Look at me. Elias." He slowly, reluctantly lifted his head. In the faint light from the hallway, she could see the tears glistening in his eyes. The fortress had been breached. The grief he had suppressed for 2 years was finally breaking through. "You think love is about avoiding pain," she said softly, her thumb stroking his shoulder. "But it's not. There are no guarantees. David was the safest man I knew, and he was taken from me in a place thousands of miles away. Amanda was here, and she was taken from you on a road you drive every day. There is no safe place from loss. Elias, there is only the choice to live and love anyway." A single tear escaped and traced a path down his cheek, then another. Soon he was weeping. The silent, shoulder-shaking sobs of a man who had held his grief inside for far too long. He buried his face in his hands, and all the pain, all the fear, all the loneliness of the past 2 years came pouring out of him. Callista did not say a word. She simply knelt beside his chair and held him, her arms a steady anchor in his storm. She held him as he cried for his wife, for his son, for the life he had lost, and for the future he was terrified to embrace. It was a catharsis, a painful, necessary release. When the storm of his weeping finally subsided, he was left feeling empty, exhausted, and strangely calm. He lifted his head and looked at her, his eyes red but clear. "I'm so scared," he admitted, the words barely a whisper. "I know," she said, her own eyes filled with tears. "Me too. But maybe we can be scared together, in that dark, quiet room." They made a silent pact. They would not let fear write the end of their story. They would choose hope. They would choose each other. The storm outside passed, and so did the one inside. In the bright, clear days that followed, the understanding between them solidified. It was never explicitly discussed, but there was no question of Callista and her children leaving. This was their home now, A new normal began to take shape. Woven from the threads of their two broken families, they created new routines, new traditions. Elias started leaving the office at 5 o'clock sharp every day, a move that sent shockwaves through his company. He came home not to a silent house, but to the cheerful chaos of 3 children doing homework at the kitchen table, with Callista presiding over the activity. A calm and loving general, they had family dinners every night, filled with talk of school and friends and playground adventures. Elias learned that Maya was a talented artist, her drawings far more sophisticated than Leo's earnest stick figures. He learned that Noah was obsessed with dinosaurs and could recite their complex names with startling accuracy. He, in turn, shared stories about his own childhood, stories he had not told in years. He was not just a lab technician or a grieving widower anymore. He was Elias. He was a father. He was part of a family. Callista brought not just life but order to their world. She created a shared calendar, managed the hectic schedules of 3 children, and turned the sterile house into a warm, functioning home. She filled the vases with wildflowers she and the children picked from the meadows surrounding the estate. She hung the children's artwork on the refrigerator, a colorful, chaotic gallery of their shared life. One Saturday afternoon, Elias sat in the living room, ostensibly reading a financial report, but he was really just watching them. Callista was on the floor with Noah, helping him build a towering city out of colorful wooden blocks. Leo and Maya were curled up on the sofa together, reading a book. Maya's arm slung comfortably around Leo's shoulders. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The room was filled with a soft, peaceful hum of contentment. He looked at Callista, at her patient smile as she helped Noah place the final block on his tower. He looked at his son, who was leaning his head against Maya's shoulder, a look of perfect peace on his face. He felt a surge of love so powerful it almost took his breath away. It was a different kind of love than he had felt for Amanda. That had been the bright, passionate love of his youth. This was a quieter, deeper love, a love forged in a storm and tempered by loss. It was a love that felt like coming home. He knew in that moment what he had to do. This could not be a temporary arrangement, a thing born of circumstance. It had to be a choice. It had to be forever. He began to plan. He knew a grand romantic gesture was not their style. Their story was not a fairy tale. It was a story of survival, of quiet healing, of building something new from the wreckage of the past. The proposal had to reflect that. It had to be about family. He decided to enlist the help of the person whose opinion mattered most, his son. That evening, after Callista and her children were asleep, he went into Leo's room and sat on the edge of his bed. He gently woke him. "Leo," he whispered, "I need to ask you a very important question." Leo sat up, rubbing his eyes. "What is it?" "Daddy, how would you feel?" Elias began, his heart pounding. "If Callista and Maya and Noah stayed with us forever, if Callista became your new mom, and Maya and Noah became your sister and brother." Leo did not even have to think about it. A wide, bright smile spread across his face. "Really?" he asked, his voice full of sleepy excitement. "You mean we could be a real family?" "Yes." "Buddy," Elias said, his own voice thick with emotion. "A real family." Leo threw his arms around Elias's neck and hugged him tightly. "Yes," he said into his father's shoulder. "Yes. Please." The next day was Saturday. The 5 of them were in the great room, engaged in the monumental task of building a blanket fort. Sheets were draped over chairs, pillows were piled high to form walls, and the children were scurrying in and out of their makeshift castle, It was a scene of happy domestic chaos. This was the moment. Elias gave Leo a small, subtle nod. It was time. Leo, his face a mask of serious importance, crawled out of the fort and walked over to Callista, who was helping to secure a corner of a wayward sheet. He was clutching something in his hands. It was a small, square box he had built that morning out of red and blue Legos. He stood before her and held out the box. "Callista," he said, his voice clear and steady. "My dad wants to know if you'll be our family forever." Callista froze, her hand still holding the sheet. She looked from Leo's earnest face to the Lego box, her expression one of stunned disbelief. She slowly knelt down to be on his level. As she did, Elias moved to stand directly behind his son. He held a small velvet box in his hand, but he did not open it yet. All his focus was on her face. Callista looked at Leo. Then her eyes lifted and met Elias's over their son's head. He saw the question in her eyes, the hope, the fear. He gave her a small, reassuring smile. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She looked back at Leo. "Yes, Leo," she whispered. Her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will," at her words. Maya and Noah, who had been watching from the entrance of the fort, let out a cheer. Elias opened his box, revealing a simple, elegant ring with a single clear diamond. It was not extravagant. It was quiet and strong and beautiful, just like her. He took her hand, and as the children watched, he slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. They were not just a man and a woman getting engaged. They were 5 people in the middle of a blanket fort choosing to become a family. Their wedding was not a grand affair. It took place 2 months later on a warm afternoon in early summer in the backyard of the house that had become their sanctuary. The only guests were the 3 people who mattered most, Leo, Maya, and Noah. Callista wore a simple white sundress, and Elias wore a linen shirt and trousers. They stood under the shade of a large oak tree, the same tree the children loved to climb. They did not have an officiant. They had written their own vows, their own ceremony. They stood facing each other, holding hands, with the children standing in a small, tight circle around them. Elias spoke first, his voice steady and clear. "Callista," he said, "I found you in a storm. I was lost too, in a different kind of storm, one that had been raging inside me for years. You and your children came into my life, and you were not just a light in the darkness. You were the calm at the center of the storm. You taught me how to live again, how to laugh again, how to love again. I promise to be your shelter, your partner, and your home for all of my days." Then it was Callista's turn. Her voice was soft, but it carried on the gentle breeze. "Elias," she began, "you didn't just save us from a storm. You gave us a place to finally be still. You gave us safety. You gave us kindness. And you gave my children back their childhoods. You looked at a broken, desperate woman, and you didn't see a burden. You saw a person. You healed me with your quiet strength and your gentle heart. I promise to fill this house and your life with love and laughter for all of my days." After they exchanged their rings, they turned to the children. Leo, as the eldest, spoke first. He held up a smooth gray stone he had found by the creek. "A family is a place to be safe," he said, his voice serious. Maya held up a bright yellow dandelion. "A family is a place to be loved," she added. Finally, little Noah, prompted by his sister, held up a twig with 2 leaves on it. "A family is forever," he declared proudly. Elias and Callista knelt and gathered all 3 children into a group hug, a messy, tearful, joyful embrace. They were married. They were a family officially, legally, and in every way that truly mattered. That evening, after the children were sound asleep, tired out from a celebratory dinner of pizza and ice cream, Elias and Callista sat by the fireplace. A gentle summer rain was falling outside, a soft patter against the windows that was a world away from the violent blizzard that had first brought them together. They sat in the same 2 chairs where they had first shared their stories, their hands intertwined. "Do you ever think about it?" Callista asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "How impossible it all was. If my car had broken down a mile earlier or a mile later, if you had left your meeting 10 minutes sooner or 10 minutes later, if you hadn't been on that road at all." Elias tightened his grip on her hand. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "But it wasn't just chance. Callista, it was a choice. I chose to stop the car. You chose to trust me. We chose to open up to each other. We chose this." She turned her head to look at him, her eyes soft in the firelight. "You saved me, Elias." He shook his head. "No," he said, his voice full of a quiet conviction. "We didn't save each other. Amanda's death broke me into 1,000 pieces. David's death sent you adrift on a raging sea. We didn't save each other. We just gave each other the pieces we were missing. We made each other whole again." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "This family isn't built on a perfect fairy tale. It's built on something much stronger. It's built on the wreckage of our pasts. It's built on choice and on courage and on the simple, radical belief that a home is not a place you find, but a place you make together." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling before them, the rain whispering outside. The house was no longer a monument to a life that was over. It was a sanctuary, a beginning, a living, breathing testament to the enduring power of second chances. It was finally and truly a home.